credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Vitruvian Man podcast. I'm your host, Zach Shankin. I want to start out today by thanking everyone that showed so much support on the last episode with Coach Lou. Really special episode for myself and a really big step for myself and the podcast. First blue check guest, a lot more exposure out there. So thank you so much for sharing. I think it turned out really well. Just an incredible man, very inspiring to myself. So very honored certainly to have him on and looking to have more guests in the future. Actually, a few collaborations coming up as well. I'll be appearing on a few different podcasts, so that's kind of exciting. First time appearing on other people's podcasts coming up soon, so that's something to look forward to if you are a fan of, I guess, mine specifically, more than just this podcast. I don't know if I have any loyal fans following the pod at this point, but for those that are interested, I'll be posting that on my Instagram and everything, so you can stay tuned to listen to where those appearances come from. This week I wanted to review a classic. It's a book that I think is one of the most important, if not the most important books you can read, barring your respective religious texts that you live your life by. I think for voluntary reading, it is one of the most important books you can read if you apply the concepts in the book to your life. And that book is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It is by no means a new book. It's been around a long time. It's sold, according to this copy from the 80s, over 15 million copies, and that was in the 80s. So I imagine it's probably it's in the hundreds of millions of copies sold now. And I read this book for the first time when I was in high school, but I think limited life experience, as well as, being encouraged to read so originally by my dad, you take it with a grain of salt to some degree. You're like, yeah, it's important, whatever. So I think it was helpful then, but having reread it a number of times, and now I'm kind of committed to myself to reread it at least twice a year. I think reminding yourself of the principles that are inside of it are really, really important. And if you want to have any amount of success as a leader, as a collaborator, and just in general, and be able to have kind of influence with and around other people, understanding the stuff that's talked about in this book, which I'll definitely get into, is so, so critical. So first I want to start off by talking about addressing the fact that I think self-help books generally, but we'll assume that you want to get better. It's why you're listening to this podcast. So assuming you don't have a bad perception of self-help books, I think this book can get a bit of a bad reputation because on the surface, even by the title alone, it can seem somewhat manipulative, even from like a Machiavellian perspective, like trying to control people for your benefit. But I think two things there. One, wanting to have influence over other people is not intrinsically evil or manipulative. And two, much like this book and the 48 Laws of Power, which comes under even more scrutiny, and I think talks about a lot of the same principles, but certainly at more depth, another book I recommend. But those books together and books that talk about the psychology of human behavior and stuff like that, they're just the rules of the game. It is how we as people interact, operate. And so you can either play the game and understand the rules or lose the game. If you don't understand about how the rules operate, you will not be successful. You will not win the game. And win for you, we've talked about this before, but your definition of success is up to you to decide. But certainly if you want to give yourself a leg up and actually be able to influence other people, you do need to understand how people think. It is just a fact. And so being upset with the book for perpetuating some sort of manipulative perspective or getting frustrated or condemning the book for being manipulative, I just think it's a little short-sighted. And I also think that when you think about the context of the book broadly, it speaks on essentially focusing on others, seeing things from other people's perspectives. So intrinsically, it is others-focused, not self-focused. So it is not a selfish pursuit to one to understand, because I think this can be applied to more than just success. I think people immediately think of like, oh, how can I have better relationships with my authority figures at work or my coworkers or in my career, whatever. But all of this stuff can be applied to your familial relationships, your friendly relationships, your romantic relationships. It's just kind of a perspective shift, and it's one of those things that you need to be reminded of. It's why I've committed to rereading it. And the last thing I want to touch on as far as the reputation is that I would argue, and this is a larger conversation and debate, but like there's no truly altruistic act. I think you can always point to some sort of selfish motive behind legitimately everything. And I don't think that is wrong. Again, it's not a condemnation. I think that is just simply human nature. We, from an evolutionary perspective, what is our prerogative? It's just to make sure that we live and produce offspring and those offspring live. So I don't think that people doing things that also benefit them is intrinsically evil. I don't think you can do an act that is like purely selfless. I think that's a broader conversation to be had. But again, wanting to understand how people work, I do not think is a bad thing. I would say that one, you're going to be more effective, and two, you're going to actually be a better person to be around, which I think is an all-around benefit to the people around you. If you're more pleasant to be with, if you are more focused on what others are sharing, you're present with them, you make them feel genuinely heard, you want to help them help themselves, and in whatever end effect it comes back to you, then I think it's a net positive for everyone. And I don't think we need to look at it as like climbing the ladder or trying to like beat somebody else out, although I obviously at the beginning referenced the whole concept of like winning the game, but that's the competitor in me, and the way I framed it. But I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think we can all win together. It does not necessarily imply that there has to be a loser. I think the real losers are the people that never try, the people that never learn the concepts and apply them and really try to get the most out of life. So I'm touting this book with a tremendous amount of praise thus far, and I think it's important in the event that you have not read it, and this is your first time either hearing about it or, I've been recommended that before, but now I'm going to consider reading it. I will say, temper your expectations, because nothing in this book outside of maybe some of the perspectives in the story are going to truly blow your mind. They're not really things that are out of the ordinary or something that you would say is really fundamentally shifting. Quite frankly, I think all of the knowledge in this is common sense, but uncommon practice. And what I mean by that is we can agree that the concepts here make sense. Oh, yeah. You should definitely don't criticize people, treat other people with respect, let them feel heard, all these different things that are in the book. People would generally agree with that. But when you interact with a lot of people, most people aren't doing that kind of stuff. And then that begs the question, why? And I think it's for the exact reason that these techniques are effective, that they're not practiced. People broadly are focused more on themselves than they are on others. And so how do you become more effective? How do you win friends and influence people? You focus more on others than you do on yourself. And it is, again, easier said than done. Everyone would agree that is the case. But then you go about your day to day, you get caught, you're the main character of your story, you're trapped in your head, you're thinking about all the things you have to do. And we kind of just allow other people to like bump into the walls, and ultimately that's not the best way to treat people with respect if they're just these kind of either non-player characters or fringe people that come in and out of your storyline. If you imagine them complexly as a real person just like you, and also understand that they are so focused on themselves and not thinking about you at all, that's when you can really have influence, because you recognize the power there. And then when you put these into practice, you are by definition using common sense in an uncommon way. And I think it's why you can be actually separated and achieve whatever monicum of success that we kind of alluded to before. I think similar to concepts of fitness and wellness, this is something that is simple, but not easy. So it is not a complicated thing that you are doing, but it is tremendously difficult. Again, for the same reason that it is effective. You are focused on yourself, so you have to continually remind yourself to be more others focused and get out of your native way. And this is not a individually you thing. This is a people thing. This is a people problem. It's why it's effective, because everybody's the same way. We're all very, very focused on ourselves. The more that you can focus on others, the more that you will be able to have influence. Another thing is that some people are really naturally pretty good at this stuff and some people aren't. But learning the techniques can help those people that aren't close the gap. I think people that naturally are really good, oh, he's a good people person, like that, those type of people, and those people are coming to your mind. You've met them along your life. They're really, extroverted, and they listen genuinely. They smile when they talk to you, all these types of things. Some people are just naturally really good at it. Other people, they're maybe more introverted. They have trouble being present, whatever it may be. Learning these techniques for both types of people will help you improve on your skill set. And the more you practice it, the more effective you will become, and also the more quote unquote natural it will get for you. The longer you do it, essentially you just become that person who's good with people, rather than before you might have been the quiet person or the introverted person or the person very focused on your tasks, and that comes off as cold to other people. So they don't really want to work with you, not because you're evil or mean or bad, but that's their perception of you. And again, everyone's focused on themselves. So if you don't make people feel good, then they're not going to want to work with you. They're not going to want to collaborate with you. They're not going to want to help you get to the place that you want to. If you come to them with an ask, hey, I need your help on this, they're going to be less inclined to do so than if you were always focused on how you could help them the most, curious about their feelings, focused on their emotional response to your actions, your words, etc. And then the last thing before I get into the actual content of the book, I guess, is saying that, like I kind of alluded to, because it is common sense but not common practice, and it is always going to be hard for you as a person, a human being, to continually be outside of yourself and not make yourself the center of your own universe. This isn't a book you read once. It's not a novel. It's a handbook. It's a field guide. It's something that you return to both remind yourself and reorient yourself, but also take notes on and implement the actual strategies consistently. Because the more you remind yourself by rereading, taking notes, being active when you read on a book like this, the more natural and front of mind the concepts will be, so that when you're interacting with someone else, you're reminded, okay, like remember to smile when you interact with people. Remember, like, as much as you may be super inclined to be argumentative right here, understand that you can't win an argument. You have to allow someone else get to the place where they understand the error of their ways, or that they let them come to the conclusion rather than trying to force them to it, because you will never win. And all these other concepts that the book talks about. And also, I fell into it too when I first read this book. Don't just like listen to this podcast and then go read it once and then think like, okay, I got the concept. Like, think about others first, think about myself less. Like, it's not about the fundamental understanding, because we all have it, right? It's common sense. But most people you interact with aren't good at it. Why? Because they don't practice it. This is a act of practice, not an act of understanding. If the challenge was in understanding, everyone would be awesome to interact with. You would never have a really high friction relationship. You would never have coworkers that suck to work with, bosses that were mean. Everybody would be good at the game. Everyone would be really excellent at interacting, but in fact, most people are not. So it points to the fact that you need to continually practice it, continually remind yourself, reread these kind of concepts. And it comes to us in a lot of different things. This isn't the only book that does it, but I think it is the lowest barrier to entry book. It tells a lot of stories, and stories are a good thing, a good way for us to cement in our mind concepts. So you can easily remember a lot of the concepts, because Dale Carnegie does a good job of, every time he kind of teaches or puts forth a newer concept, he has a bunch of these stories of how it was implemented or wasn't implemented by somebody, and the lessons we can take from that like we learn through stories. We have like our memory latches on to stories very well, and that's a topic for another episode again, on the kind of psychology of memory and stuff. But the stories in there can help you learn, and that's why I encourage you to read it. So, this podcast will not be an exhaustive summary. I will make that caveat now. So don't expect to pass the test later if you don't go and read it. So the book is broken down into 4 main sections. First, techniques in handling people. 2, 6 ways to make people like you. 3, win people to your way of thinking, and 4, be a leader, how to change people without giving offense or resentment. And so I want to go through some of the important things that I've kind of pulled from each section. It's relatively concise in of itself. So again, my encouragement is whenever you do finish listening to this podcast, first, share it with a friend, but 2, go and read the book for yourself. It's not a hard read. It's not too long of a book, and it will have a massive impact on your life. So my encouragement is definitely to read it, but I want to share some of the most important kind of overarching concepts that are shared from each of those sections that I took away to hopefully, share the concepts with you guys and act as both an encouragement to read it, but also potentially you can take some value from this kind of summary or my perspective on it. So in the first section, techniques in handling people, the first major point, and this could be 1, a podcast in of itself, but 2, maybe just a major takeaway on its own, is do not criticize, condemn, or complain. Something we can kind of learn, and he talks about in the book in a lot of different ways and phrases it a bunch of different ways, is that being argumentative and being critical and condemning people, when you step back and look at what is the result that's going to yield in another person, unless they are extremely emotionally resilient or understand on a very fundamental level that you're just giving logical, critical feedback, and this is a very small percentage of people, most people are broadly very emotional, you're just going to make them feel bad. And it's that famous quote, I don't remember who said it, maybe Maya Angelou, but they won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you make them feel. And so if you're looking to be a good leader, a good peer, a good coworker, partner, whatever, you have to take into account not only the things you say to people, but how those things make them feel. And so criticism automatically places people in a defensive state of mind and a frame, because something is being pointed out about me now that is lesser than, or is a lack, or needs to be improved upon. And everyone, like I said, is emotional. They're also very insecure about their ability in the world. And so if you point out those insecurities, those shortcomings, those gaps, however logically and fundamentally founded they are and true, you're not actually going to get the result. Because why would you criticize in the first place? Maybe to make them change the behavior. But all you're really going to do is make them start justifying their actions to you, or even if they don't respond immediately, maybe they just kind of take it quietly and go about their day. They're going to start justifying it in their mind. Well, he doesn't know this because I was busy with so-and-so, and it was actually Stacy's fault because she didn't send me the email, and whatever it is, they're going to start playing it back in their head. And then ultimately you just become the villain, and the focus has completely left what you wanted, which was fixing the problem. And now it's on you and you're the bad guy. Criticism it's just wounding the pride and their own sense of importance, and it's just going to build that resentment, like I said. Additionally, anyone can criticize. It's like the lowest common denominator. You can think a great example is like the armchair quarterback. Like any fat bastard can sit on the couch and watch a football game and be like, God, he underthrew that pass by 5 yards. That's crazy. Or how did he miss that tackle? And it's like, okay, these are 1% athletes going against 1% athletes. It's possible that the other guy just made a play on the field, but the lowest common denominator, any bum can criticize somebody else. It takes actual self-control, discipline, and a level of forethought to be able to give forgiveness, first of all, if somebody falls short, just be forgiving, and 2, be understanding of the context where a mistake was made. I think the concept, and it comes from the phrase imagine others complexly, comes to me from John Green. And I think it's really beautifully said, because instead of imagining yourself as the only dynamic character, the only main character, every single person you see that you walk down the street is living just as complex a life. Like those people have struggles, insecurities, loves, passions, interests. And so when somebody makes a mistake at work, put yourself in their shoes, just pretend you're them for a day, put their outfit for work on, and understand well, maybe they missed the email because their inbox is flooded with 50. They had a stressful week. The relationship at home isn't going a certain way. They were sick this weekend. All these other things that are confounding variables for somebody potentially, quote unquote, messing up. The same way that you could easily just slip up and make a mistake yourself. No one is perfect. You are not perfect. So instead of condemning and criticizing and letting that be the default, challenge yourself to be a bit above that. Try to be understanding and forgiving, and it'll go a lot further to actually getting the problem fixed. And it'll also win to your side the people that you're interacting with, as opposed to making enemies. I think that one thing that goes along with this is another thing he talks about in this section is giving honest and sincere appreciation. I think this is extremely uncommon. As a leader or like a boss, it's easy to give like the pat on the head, like, good job, that was a nice email or a great meeting. But people, and especially people of like my generation, people raised on the internet, exposed to a lot of thought, and also since pretty much the time we were born, someone's trying to sell you something online. People have a really, really high bullshit meter, and it's finely tuned. So if you're being anything less than fully sincere with the appreciation you give to someone, they can sense that, and it's just empty praise. Quite frankly, it's almost a backhanded compliment, right? Like, you were able to do this thing, and I clearly didn't expect it out of you, so good on you. But instead, you can give genuine and sincere appreciation. And so how do you do that? Well, first of all, be interested in the other person. But two, understand the effort it probably took them to do something. If somebody has a killer presentation, say, instead of saying, hey, good presentation this morning, be like, hey, I really felt like you commanded the room and spoke with confidence. Like, clearly you prepared well for that, and you delivered the message in a super succinct way. I appreciate you taking all the time to do that. See the difference between the two things? It only takes a few extra words to get to the second one, but because you're thinking about the details, because you're putting them front of mind, it's going to make them feel special. Essentially, the easiest way to the best heuristic for this is give the kind of compliments and appreciation that you would want to receive. For me, it's like, I'd rather a boss say nothing than like just kind of an empty, good job for that, or thanks for getting that email out. Like, it's pretty much meaningless, because what's your immediate quip? Like, let's play the interaction. Like, hey, Zach, like, thanks for getting the email out. Yeah, sure, no problem. Like, that's it. Like, it was almost like a canned response. So like, I have not emotionally attached to that conversation, nor have I received any genuine compliment. And likewise, they just lobbed it because they felt obligated. But instead of that, be the person who gives genuine appreciation and make people feel special. And this like plays into the next point that I wanted to touch on, which is, he says in the book, you should arouse in other people an eager want. So people want to feel important. You want to feel important. We want to feel like we have an impact and we're being significant. So in the workplace, in a relationship, in whatever it is, in the family setting, sports team, whatever you find yourself in, everyone around you wants to feel important. So let other people feel important and get excited about the things that you're asking them to do. Instead of just giving an itemized task list, provide some context for why you're asking something of someone. It's kind of the best hack to get somebody to do something for you. If you ask and then you provide the context to why it's important, instead of saying like, hey, can you get this email to so-and-so and this PowerPoint deck, whatever. And these are boring work examples for sure, but you will certainly get I hope that as you're listening, you're thinking about how this can be applicable to your life. And then also, if you go and actually read the book, Dale does a much better job than me of sharing pertinent stories to each. So actually, I'll share a story from the book that he talks about in the section where he says arouse in other people an eager want. So he shares this story of this woman. She had a apartment in some city, and there were these kind of ruffian goon kids that would always kind of like loiter and throw rocks and stuff in the street in her front yard and kind of make a mess, do property damage. And so instead of just going out there and being critical and screaming like, get off my lawn and all this other stuff, she found one of the kids and asked him specifically. She said, hey, I need this to stop happening because of, X, Y, and Z reason on my end, but I know that you're the type of kid that is the leader of this group and can have an impact. And so I would like for you to help encourage your friends to stop doing the same. So she endowed this kid with essentially a superpower, which is the responsibility and the sense of importance. Like, I'm the leader of this group. It gave him an identity, something to live up to, like a worthy ideal to strive towards. And in doing so, she had the result that she wanted. The kids stopped coming around because now there was a kid that personally had accountability for the result of what him and his friends were doing and like the tomfoolery they were getting up to. So that's a pretty cool story, a very simple one, but certainly explains or illustrates the point well. So those are the main three that I wanted to talk about in the first section, which is don't criticize, condemn, or complain, give honest and sincere appreciation, and then arouse in other people an eager want. So on to the second section of the book, which is 6 ways to make people like you. I've written down 5 of the 6. I will list them and then expound upon the ones that I feel like need further explanation, because some do, some don't. First is become genuinely interested in other people. This goes back to the sincere appreciation thing, but you can think of it less of like, hey, here's a thank you for a task, but more like instead of asking, what'd you do this weekend? Or just the kind of surface level questions, you can become genuinely interested in what they're interested in. And this one takes a bit of special attention when you're interacting with people, but it can yield some really, really special fruit because people are passionate about what they're passionate about, and it makes them feel really heard and special when other people show a genuine interest in the things that they're interested in, and not some sort of feigned interest like, oh, wow, that seems really cool. Tell me more about that. But you can really be genuine. Again, the bullshit meter is finely tuned, so you need to be present and actually care about what makes other people happy. And quite frankly, you don't actually have to be interested in the thing. But if you are interested in the relationship you have with this person, whether you want them to be a successful employee of yours, coworker, romantic partner, like you don't have to actually give a singular damn about the thing. But if you care about the person, caring about the thing is good for them. And so that's the way you can frame it in your mind. It's like, I really don't care about underwater basket weaving, but Stacy really does. That's her, like, that's what she wakes up for. It's why she works the 5 days during the week so that on the weekends she can go do her damn thing and weave baskets underwater. So I'm really going to be into that, not because I actually care at all about the basket weaving, but because I care about her as a person and I can tell it makes her happy and makes her smile. Become genuinely interested in other people. The second one is smile. This is an easy one. Again, one of the very common sense, but not common practice things. When you talk to people, smile. There's all this like evolutionary psychology about smiling and the importance of nonverbal communication. We don't have to get into all the granularity there, but it's easy enough to understand that when you talk to people, smile, present a smile, smile when they say something funny, just be warm. It disarms people. It is inviting and makes them feel a lot better. So that one's pretty simple. Smile. Oh, another huge one, which I'm horrible at. Most people are pretty bad at, is remembering people's name. He says that the sweetest sound to anyone's ear is their own name. But this is so powerful. If you can get really good at this, you will be a much more effective person, employee, whatever. Just remembering somebody's name, especially upon initial meeting, and then being able to recall it the next time you see them for whatever reason. And it goes back to us being extremely selfish and pretty emotional just as people. It feels special when someone remembers your name because then you're like, oh, I was important enough for them to remember. So if you do the same thing for other people, you give them a sense of like importance in their mind. They feel special. And all you were really doing is just being a little bit more conscious, paying much more close attention. There's a ton of memory tricks. I'm not going to get into that, but like you can repeat it back to yourself, all this other stuff. But really focus on trying to be the person that always remembers names. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do. You can be like, after you meet somebody, write their name down in your phone and a quick thing about them. It makes it a lot harder to forget. But if you can always be the person to remember it, and then the secondary thing is that when you're talking to people, say their name. And this is a bit of a fine balance because, again, the bullshit meter is tuned. So you don't want to be too salesy. Like, you know, Zach, that sounds really good. And oh, Zach, I love the way you said that. But like, if you can space it in a couple times when you're talking to people, people love to hear their own name. So remember it in the first place and then continue to reference back to their name. There's a sense of identity wrapped in our names. There's all kinds of positive psychology around it. So if you can continually remember it, continually present it to them, it will do wonders for you. The next is be a good listener. Again, you're starting to see a trend with all of these. It's very others focused, allow them to tell the story, let them feel important. So be a good listener, ask an open-ended question like, How did that make you feel? Or why were you interested in that? Or could you tell me more about that? And let them drive the conversation. A quote from Seneca is, "You're given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So you should listen twice as much as you speak, minimum." So if you can get yourself to be double the amount of time in a conversation spent listening to speaking, you're going to do 2 things. 1, you're going to make the other person feel important because people love to talk. And 2, you're going to be learning more than not because you already know yourself. Hopefully you're doing the work, you're journaling, you're exploring yourself, working on yourself, coming to know yourself and your identity. But that's a private practice. When you're interacting with other people, think of every interaction you have with someone as an awesome way to learn about the world, about them, about business, whatever it may be. Assume that they know something you don't and you want to learn it. The only way you're going to get there is by talking less. So it's a win-win. 1, you're going to learn. 2, you're going to let them feel important and speak their piece, basically, get up on the soapbox and go. And so make sure that you're a good listener and let others talk about themselves. And then the final 2, which I've kind of definitely already touched on, is talk in terms of other people's interests. Again, speak about the things that they're interested in, provide context, reference it back, always make kind of like subtle jokes and references back to things that they care about, and then make the other person feel important. You do this by listening. You do this by referencing things they care about. Kind of all of the ones that I've listed above fall under that as a bit of a bucket. So that is kind of the major takeaways from the second section, 6 ways to make people like you. Section 3 is win people to your way of thinking. This section is all about argument, and pretty much immediately when the section opens, the first thing you learn is that the only way to win an argument is to just not have it. The idea of winning an argument is actually a completely flawed one. And unless you are in a scored debate, meaning somebody else in the third party is deciding whether you have like logically scored your way out, and then we can all agree based on the score that so-and-so won or lost. But even in that context, we can say, did the other team actually reframe their belief set? Probably not. They probably just went back to the drawing board and were like, oh, he had a good point. I need to be able to refute this, this, and this. All you do by arguing is just further distance yourself from the other person, because you're going to have to get up and say your piece. And the whole time you're talking, they're thinking about what they're going to say back to you. And so you're just further pushing. Everybody's had those really uncomfortable political debates at the family gatherings in the holidays. And the holiday season is coming up. So a way to prepare for that is avoid it altogether. Be the person that when that kind of conversation comes up at dinner, pivot it towards something else. Let somebody else talk about what they're interested in, passionate about, pivot it to something like low friction, like sports or whatever, something that can diffuse the situation. Or if somebody really is adamant about sharing their opinion, we're entering election season and they're talking about their candidate that's really going to change things and blah, blah, blah. Just sit back, nod and say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. That's curious. I'll have to look that up. Thank you. And then just leave it at that. Even if it's just making your blood boil, all that you do by arguing is make you the enemy of them. Because instead of it being a conflict of ideals, it becomes a conflict of personalities. People are super tied emotionally to the things that they believe. And when you don't believe those things, they think that you are disagreeing with them as a person, not the idea. It ties back into the overarching concept from the book. People are emotional. So do not argue with a point, because quite frankly, you're arguing with the person, or at least that's how they're going to receive it. There's actually a lot of like really important ones in this section. For instance, never say to someone else, you're wrong. This goes back to the don't criticize, condemn, or complain. If you're kind of hearing things as somebody saying it, and even if you know that they're incorrect, what is the result of you saying that they're wrong? Immediate defensiveness. If someone says you're wrong, you'd be like, no, I'm not. And I'm not, because of all these reasons. They're just immediately going to be on the defensive and not actually think about it. If you want them to think about the beliefs that they had, just start to question it and make them elaborate. If you truly believe it's unfounded, then they'll walk them quietly, allow them to walk themselves to the answer. Oh, that's an interesting belief. Why do you believe that? That's interesting. Have you heard about this one thing? Have you looked into this? But don't say, no, you're wrong and this is why, because you're not gonna get anywhere with that. And similarly, another way to get other people to have a ton of respect for you is that when you are wrong, which you inevitably will be. We make plenty of errors along the way and throughout life. Admit it emphatically and often, often. Be the first person to say you're wrong. Don't let somebody else tell you when you messed up. Always be the person to admit it. Like, yep, that was me. I was totally wrong, completely off base there. I apologize. I'll get on to it. I'll be better next time. The people that do that you've seen in your life, you have a ton of respect for, because that's like a class act. That's a man or woman of integrity. And so you show integrity by doing that. And you also take away the power of somebody else to be able to kind of condemn and sully your character by pointing out your flaws. If you point out your own flaws, it in fact improves your character in the eyes of others, as opposed to allowing them to be like, oh, they were wrong, and they didn't say anything, so they were trying to hide it. It calls into question a lot about your behavior. So be the person to admit when you're wrong early and often. The rest of this section goes into some little bits and tactics, which I think can be very effective if you're actually trying to maybe win a business negotiation or actually have a bit of an argument. But I think broadly applied to life, it's much more important to lean on the side of just not having them. If you want some of those more granular tips and tricks, they are very effective. They're really important, but I would suggest you actually get the book and like read into that. I think if you are a person who's trying to be in a position of sales or any kind of thing where you're trying to convince somebody, and I think a lot of life and business is sales, so they can be effective. But I think if we're just looking at like, how does this book apply to our life broadly, just walk away from the argument and let other people run their mouth. And then the fourth and final section of the book is Be a Leader, How to Change People Without Giving Offense or Arousing Resentment. And a lot of the stuff in this section is kind of reiterations in the context of leadership specifically of the stuff that he talked about earlier in the book. So things like begin with praise and honest attention, call attention to people's mistakes indirectly instead of directly, talk about your own mistakes before you go to criticize somebody else. Lead with something like, I'm always really bad at so-and-so and so-and-so, and I actually messed up on this last week. So I totally get where you're coming from. I thought maybe you were a little off base on this one thing. Like, let's work to correct that. It makes the blow a lot softer when you've already condemned yourself. Ask questions instead of giving orders. Again, you can think of it in the context of argument like we talked about before, but probe somebody to get them to realize what they need to do or the mistake that they made, rather than saying, you did something wrong, you need to go to do this. You can say, well, what were you doing with this thing? Or how are you planning on getting to this end result? Oh, well, I hadn't thought about it that way. Oh, well, maybe could you try something? It's a gentler on-ramp to where you want to get to, and you're less likely to offend someone. Always give somebody an ability to save face. If somebody really messes up, give them the out. Don't box somebody into a corner, because, a cornered animal is a dangerous animal. In the same way, if somebody feels emotionally cornered and they're going to be fully on the defensive, the walls are going to go up. They're not going to be very receptive to feedback and willing to change. So always give somebody the ability to have an out, and be gracious and allow them that out and say, oh, no, it's actually not a big deal. We'll just take a look at it again. And then, like earlier, we talked about making other people feel important. The phraseology he uses is give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. An example of this from my personal life, which I think is super important and kind of tragic, and it goes into a conversation which I'll maybe have touched on in the past, but definitely will touch on in the future on the podcast, is the power of words and identity and phrases and how we talk about ourselves and other people. So when I was in elementary school, I loved reading, really loved it. I consider myself to this day a decently smart person. And then I was, reading well. I was an accelerated student, whatever. But one of my teachers, I think it was in third grade, insane that I remember it, but it was something that really rocked me and actually took away my love of reading for over 8 years. There was a time where, they started to have to structure our reading, right? So it was like a signed book, then you write a certain assignment about it. You have to do a report, you take the grade, whatever. It was I think it was called the AR reading system or something. So it really started to gamify it. And I loved reading. I was reading all the time. So I wasn't bad at it, but my ability to translate for some of these books I wasn't being effective at it for whatever the reason was, right? But it doesn't mean I'm a dumb person, or at least I choose not to believe that I'm stupid. But at the time, I remember getting pulled out of class from like the accelerated reading group. And we were at the time, that group was reading Black Beauty. And this legitimately, the teacher not only pulled me out of class, but like had my parents come in and sit down and say, Zach has been struggling with reading. So we're actually going to put him in the decelerated learning group and like go, I was going to get put from reading Black Beauty and doing book reports on that to, I think the book was called like Simon the Snake or something just so elementary. And granted, I was in elementary school, but I mean, I could read. Like, I was a smart kid. I was like consuming books outside of school. But by doing that, by telling me that I was lesser than, by telling me that I was someone who struggled with reading, by framing me, it really like fucked with my head. It like put me in an emotionally vulnerable state. She even tried to put me on Ritalin, a separate discussion on like the use of drugs to fix our issues as opposed to actually working on ourselves. I have my opinions on that. And then thank God my parents didn't allow me to get put on anything like that. But all of this stuff goes to say you have the ability with the words you use to describe other people to allow them to get to a high quality reputation, something to live up to. Raise the bar and people will be able to jump and grab it. But if you put the bar so low or below a person, one, it's demeaning, but two, that's where they will default to. If you ask the bare minimum, people will give you the bare minimum. So put the bar somewhere high, and then the way he phrases it is give a fine reputation. Well, use positive identifiers to allow the person to step into that space. Say like, I know that you are a person who cares about doing things thoroughly. I know that you're a detail-oriented person. I know you're a person with good vision for our company. So I'm putting you in charge of this assignment. Do you think you can do a good job? Well, you've already made the subconscious association with all of those positive attributes for them. And so now they have to live up to that and can live up to that. People are capable of that, but you have to give them the reputation to live up to. And then when they deliver, that's when you circle back to all the things we talked about before. Sincere appreciation. Let them talk about their experience. Be present in all that. I will digress, but that was kind of a smaller example where I felt kind of the opposite of that when I was really, really young. And for me, it was, I didn't read another book cover to cover from that time till sometime halfway through college. So it was a long, long time. I became the kid that would spark notes everything. And I look back on it pretty sad because that's 8 years or plus of my life that I'll never get to go and fill with the books I could have been reading. Our time is so limited, and like all that time I could have learned so much more, but I don't lament it anymore. I try to be as active reading as I can now, and that's the best that I can do. But point is, it can have a serious, significant effect. And just the words that were used to describe me by putting me, oh, you're not ready for this group. You're struggling with reading. You're a slow reader. You're all this stuff. I lived into that identity. I thought, oh, I'm just not a good reader. And it became my identity, but it's not a truth. That's a statement of belief, not truth. And I fell into that statement of belief because it was given to me by an authority figure, and I was young and whatever else. But as someone interacting with other people, you have the opportunity to do the same or allow them to live up to something. So the challenge statement is let somebody live up to something meaningful. So that kind of concludes the 4-section review. I know it was to some degree sporadic. Certainly the book is a lot more organized, and it provides a ton of really cool examples, both from history, and it was also written in a pretty cool era, like America on the come up industrial wise. So I think it's a lot of cool stories from that time period. So my encouragement, definitely read the book. As kind of some closing thoughts, remember, other people are emotional. They're more focused on themselves. We have a tendency to think that people are creatures of logic, but in fact, a lot of the logical decisions we make are emotionally driven in the first place. So always remember that, and always try to remember how you're making someone feel with the words that you say. 2, the true key to influencing other people is allow them to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. You're not going to change their wants, but you can let them speak their piece and then help them get there, and then they will be inclined to help you do the same. And then finally, kind of the secret to success from the book is, if there's any secret to success, it lies in the ability to get to the other person's point of view and see things from their perspective as well as your own. That is kind of the statement piece of the book, surmised in one sentence. Do your best every time you interact with any other person, period, full stop, to see things from their perspective. Imagine them complexly, put yourself in their shoes. You're now looking at yourself from their perspective. How did they get there? Backstep their day. The phrase woke up with the wrong side of the bed. Did they have a poor night of sleep last night? Did they miss breakfast? Did they spill coffee this morning? Did they get bitched out by their significant other before they left for work? Did they get stuck in traffic? All of these things, is their back tight from whatever? Are they tired from being sick all weekend? Did they travel? All the things that can allow you to be, suboptimal, be performing below your best. Every other person is equally likely and capable of having those same variables lead them right in front of you. And so instead of just looking at call and response right in front of you and, why is that person all twisted up and not listening to my feedback? Or why did they get so emotional when I just asked them to do this one thing? Like, if somebody blows up in your face, it probably had very little to do with what you said or even what the context is. It has all these other things that were built up. But understand that everyone has the emotional background to every conversation that they're bringing. So be forgiving, be present with them, listen, and you'll go far further and achieve far more than if you try to do it alone or if you only operate in some sort of cold and results-oriented manner. You will get more results, go far further, be supported far more if you view things from other people's perspective. So that is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. My summary. I hope you found value in it. I certainly was inspired. I did my biannual rereading a couple of weeks ago. I posted something on my story. So it's relatively top of mind. I've been meaning to knock this episode out for a while because I think it's so important. I honestly can't overemphasize how important this book is to read. Again, not because it's like groundbreaking content, but because you're not doing the things in this book and it is hurting you. Every single day that you don't operate by these principles, you are missing out on the opportunity to have a better impact on other people's lives and have a better life yourself. And it goes right back to me too. Like I'm by no means a perfect person, and I often get wrapped up in the complexities of my story, and I get the main character syndrome. So reminding myself of this, keeping this book, on the desk year round, rereading it at least twice is a great reminder to think about others before you think about yourself. That's all I have for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for making it this far. Again, I appreciate all those that have shared and enjoyed, especially last episode with Coach Lou. He was so kind as to give his time to myself. So I thank you guys for viewing the episode, sharing the episode, enjoying it. I think it was a good message. He's an amazing guy. So if you found value in this episode, I ask that you share it with just one person that might find it interesting. If any of this stuff that I talked about in this episode is of interest, I encourage you to check out the other stuff that I've done. You can follow along at Vitruvian Gentleman on Instagram. It's where I post a lot of the clips. I'm active on that as well as my personal at ZDSCHENKEN. I'm hoping to get a Twitter presence within the next couple months. Bandwidth is kind of the limiting factor as to what kind of platforms I'm on right now, but potential Twitter in the future. If there's anything in specific you would like to have me talk about, please message me. I'm always interested in learning new things, sharing my thoughts and perspective on X, Y, and Z topic. If there's anyone in particular you want me to reach out to get on the podcast, I'm also open to that. So please message me as well. Keep your eye out for some collaborations coming down the pipeline. I'm super excited about that. But otherwise, I will let you get back to your day. Remember, your time is your most valuable resource. So thank you genuinely for spending a little bit of it with me today. Memento Mori, and I will see you on the next episode of the Vitruvian Man podcast.
And if he fails, at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.